Welcome back, everyone, to Open Line. Glad you were with us. We're talking about Metro Public Schools. There's a new documentary out by the Nashville Public Education Foundation. Cour is the president of that organization, and it discusses the history of our public schools and really looks forward into the future. Kind of set it up first part of the show. We have several calls now. Let's go to Mike. Hello, Mike.
Good evening, Ben, and good evening to President Cour. First of all, I don't know if you remember, Madam President, when there was a big uproar in the first term of President Obama's term where he was going to make a speech to the nation, and it was supposed to be aired also for public schools, private schools as well. And there was a big uproar in certain school districts across the country where parents didn't want this to be seen. To see a black president, I believe, to be shown to the fresh minds of students, because when you do that, those students grow up to know that people of color can grow up to be president. They know that women can grow up to be presidents and CEOs of companies. And it's something my mom said, and it's very vital in this forum we're talking about tonight, is that visibility has value. And a lot of parents don't want their children to see that black president because they grow up knowing that, hey, a black man has already achieved to the highest office in the land. One of the things about critical race theory, which is the conversation everybody's talking about, is that America doesn't want to explore its history. They want to show the good part of our history, what Lincoln did and so, what we did and how we won this war and that war. But it doesn't want to deal with the main things that are making our society what it is today, and that's systemic racism that has been derived from the genocide of the Native Americans and slavery of African Americans. And until we deal with that, it's just like putting a Band-Aid on a wound with a major artery cut and thinking that Band-Aid and a couple of the Advil is going to take care of the main cause, which is an artery that's open and it needs to be taken care of. It's the main root and cause, and that's what we need to do.
Right.
And that's my comment for tonight. And you guys have a good
Mike,
night.
all right. Thank you, Mike. Thank you for calling in. Okay, so Mike throws out several things, two words that we're hearing a lot: systemic racism, critical race theory. So in the midst of all of the public debate that we're seeing now over those things, this documentary comes out. What do you think when you hear people talk about, you know, systemic racism and the battle over that, critical race theory, the battle over that, and then where does this documentary, how does it fit into those debates?
So I appreciate the call from Mike, and those are very heavy topics, and I'll try to be as brief as possible. But systemic racism is not about an individual being racist, although we certainly know that that still exists as well. Systemic racism is about processes and policies that were put in place many years ago that have created a process that certain groups in our community are not able to achieve or to have the same opportunities as other groups. It's the acknowledgement of that, and I understand how difficult it is to talk about race. I am also working on the way I think about race relations personally, and I understand that completely. But it seems to me that when I was a history major in college, we didn't use the term critical race theory, we just called it history. We just called it understanding our history and learning from it so that we can build something better going forward. So I'm very sad by the debate on critical race theory. I really believe in our teachers in public schools, and I think that they are doing a fantastic job talking about really challenging topics, and I really wish that our state legislature had not proposed the critical race theory legislation, because I do think it's not in the best interest of students and families.
And I've struggled with how I don't know perfectly how to define critical race theory, but if somebody said this is an extension of critical race theory, what would you say?
Critical race theory is an academic higher education study And so I don't know how our documentary would be defined as critical race theory, or really what we teach in our curriculum in social studies or anything else in public schools. But I do think it addresses topics like systemic racism and what white privilege and issues of whiteness are doing in our community still. And so that might make some people uncomfortable, and I understand that. And we, in my opinion, need to have those difficult conversations in order to move forward as a community.
And it's not just to wallow in sadness, it is to move forward, right? I mean, it's not just to point fingers and say, boy, we messed up. It is to try and move forward. And so if somebody's frustrated that we are again focusing on that, explain why you feel like we need to focus on that.
Yeah, I think you hear at the end of the film a kind of flip to what's next. The film is called By Design, The Shaping of Nashville's Public Schools, and we called it that specifically because there was intention in the policies that were put into place for years to prioritize certain groups of students over others. The end of the film really flips to where are we going from here? What are we going to design going forward? And that is a very hopeful conversation. And I just don't, I don't think that we can design the right type of system, the right city for all of us, without understanding the types of policies and practices that were put in place generations ago. I just don't see a way to move forward without really getting at the root causes of why we are where we are today.
Nothing wrong with looking at that. Let's go to Rob. Hello, Rob.
Yes, sir.
Go right ahead.
Okay. The fella called in about this systemic racism. I was trying to figure it out. I live in a small town. I've got colored friends. The only thing I can say is I'm thinking maybe all the systemic racism is in the big cities that's Democrat run. I don't know, but in the country, we've got colored friends. The colored friends is, you know.
You don't like talking about.
I'm trying to figure it out.
You don't like talk about systemic racism. You don't feel like it exists.
No. I think we're going backwards instead of forward. It's about all I can say. We need to move on.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Like I said, I mean, a small town. I don't see it here. You know, is it just the big cities, or maybe somebody needs to take a poll and try to figure it out? Is it big cities in the country, or is it just the big cities?
Okay.
I'll leave it at that. Thank y'all. Love everybody.
Rob, I'm glad you called in. I really am. Thank you, Rob. So Rob's not going to be alone in his thoughts.
Yeah.
What do you say?
I love how Rob talked about that. I mean, he obviously has friends who don't look like him, and that is really the first step for all of us. And I hope we all, as a community, have lots of different types of friends. So kudos to Rob. And I don't think I think the way to think about systemic racism, and I'm sure it's more prominent in more dense communities because we have more data points. And when you start looking at the data, you can actually see patterns that are disturbing. And you see higher incarceration rates in certain groups. You see higher dropout rates in certain groups of races. And either you can say that there's something that is different about the race, or you can say that the systems that we put in place are preventing certain groups of people from moving forward. And I don't think anyone, at least, you know, I'm sure Rob and anyone that we know would ever say that something is inherently different or inferior about different races. And so for me, systemic racism is really the only way to explain the differences in the deep inequities and gaps that we see among the races today.
And the poverty that exists in certain parts of town.
Absolutely.
Right? And and so Rob is saying move on. Rob wouldn't be the only one who's saying move on. But in order to move on, you're saying let's kind of address some things and then we can move on. Mm-hmm. Is that essentially what you're saying? That's
right. And you want to do that for a couple of reasons. You want to do that to pay respect to communities of color that have a knowledge of their own history that is not shared among the rest of the city of Nashville. But you also want to do it to create a shared discussion, a shared language, a shared conversation so that we all have an idea of where we want to go together, and that it's not a conversation about what a Black community might want versus what a white community might want versus what a Latinx community might want. It's a conversation about what Nashville will want.
All right. We are going to take a break. And if you want to call in, there's a number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Take a break. Continue our discussion right after this.